Hey everyone, welcome back to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to other people about their stories with vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, or VEDS, which I also have. This is Katie, and today I have Mariah with me, who's going to tell us her story with VEDS. Hey Mariah.
Hey Katie, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. I'm nervous, but I'll get through it.
No need to be. I'm really glad that you're sharing your story. As you probably know, I love talking to people about their stories with VEDS. It's been really special. So thank you for coming on to share your story.
Definitely. I appreciate all the interviews you've done, and it's nice to remember that there's other people out there.
So how are you diagnosed with VEDS?
So for me, it started after a hysterectomy. I was about 37. Um, and really, like a couple years before that is when I had an appendix rupture. And when I went into the ER, they did a CT scan then. It was in my mid to late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And with the CT scan, they found the abdominal aortic aneurysm. And there was some other stuff that goes with that, like a dissection into both iliac arteries and the right renal artery.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
which I mean, honestly, at that time, I felt sort of invincible. Like we had really, really crappy insurance and a super high deductible. So that, I don't know if other people have experienced that too, but like through your 20s and maybe your 30s a bit too, you sort of are probably, I felt like I was in the prime of my life. I was running like 6 miles, maybe 2 or 3 times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not really worried about that kind of stuff. Um, and an appendix rupture or removal is pretty common. Um, and it was confusing to know that they saw an aneurysm, and I wasn't really familiar what that was. The vascular surgeon that consulted on that case was not helpful at all. We'll call him Dr. G. Um, and um, he was convinced that although I could not remember anything, that I had to have had some kind of blunt force trauma to my abdomen at some time in my life, and that is where the aneurysm and dissection came from. So,
So he thought that the renal dissection, the iliac dissections, and the abdominal aortic aneurysm came from that.
yes,
Okay.
from an imaginary, yes, this thing that I could not remember happened. I mean, I've been in a couple car accidents, that was really all I could think of. And he's like, oh no, nope, it wouldn't have happened from a car accident. So I was like, I got nothing. Um, and after the fact too, my mom even went to an appointment with me, and she directly asked him, is this some kind of congenital situation that we're dealing with? And the words out of his mouth were absolutely not. And so his recommendation was just to watch it, really, to make
Mm-hmm.
sure it doesn't grow, which is kind of what we all do now anyway. Um, but also during that time, my menstrual cycles were getting worse and worse and worse, which eventually led me to that hysterectomy
Mm-hmm.
um, with Dr. Jimmy here in Omaha, and he is really a doctor. I would describe him as an angel. He was like most incredible bedside manner. I mean, really, he's like an OBGYN, and he does surgery too. Um, but that's when he made the comment, actually using the term vascular Ehlers-Danlos and VEDS, to my husband after surgery, because it was supposed to be an endoscopy. I think that's the right word. But because there was so much endometriosis, my uterus was actually fused to my bowel, part of my bowel,
Ooh.
which was why I was having, yeah, horrible, right? Having so much pain, especially when I went to the bathroom, just tons of bleeding. So the surgery went a lot longer than it should have. But anyway, today I have one ovary left. Um, that was probably the best decision I ever made to get that um, disgusting part of my body removed. Like it changed just my quality of life for
Yeah.
real. I know that's a weird thing to say, but um,
No, I've considered that too.
and
It's nice to hear you say
yeah,
it.
yeah, right. Um, so although I mean that was definitely not his specialty, so he didn't want to, say, guys, she's got it, and you need to do something about it. So he said, please look into it. If you have any questions, I can direct you, give you some referrals.
Hmm.
So when I was recovering from my hysterectomy, um, very quickly after that, I got a bowel obstruction. Um, so during that whole time, Brian, my husband, was doing a lot of research. And I mean, we've been together for almost 20 years. So he's known me for a long time, and all the weird things that happen with my body. Um, like that's even a disclaimer that I had started saying when I had doctor's appointments before my diagnosis. Something would happen and I'd be like, okay, so I have kind of a weird body and this is what's happening. Um, but after we started reading more about VEDS, I mean, everything just fell into place.
Hmm.
And we got hooked up with a geneticist. Um, and I told you before, it was 8 weeks, which is relatively short, it sounds like, from a lot of people's experiences. But man, that was torturous, waiting 8 weeks. Um, and we were 90% sure that it was going to be positive. But there was this little part in me that was thinking, like, what if he calls and says, yeah, your body is super messed up, but you don't have VEDS? Like,
Hmm.
I think that part was more scary than thinking he was going to call and say, yes, it's a positive result. So there was some relief. We got that call. I think it was um, 4th of July weekend, because I was afraid he would be gone all week and not call. But he did. He's so kind. He actually moved. The geneticist, Dr. Rush, moved to Kansas City now, but a very kind man. And so then we just kind of had to sit with that for a while. And um, part of that healing process, too, after the bowel obstruction, which, by the way, was way more painful than the appendix rupture, um, my Achilles was just all screwed up in my right leg. So 3 months after my hysterectomy, I had an Achilles lengthening surgery on my right leg, which I had already had done on my left leg in high school.
So you just have like
So
a weird
those,
body history for real.
yes, pretty much, yeah, like that. Um, I mean, it's hard. Like sometimes you think, like, gosh, that was the hardest experience I've ever had, and then something else comes along, and you're like, nope, that was way more painful and way more sucky, and I can't believe I made it through that. And then something else comes along, and you're like, hmm, this really sucks too. But I don't know. That's been
I
my
totally
experience for a
relate
while.
to that though. I totally relate to
Yeah.
it.
Okay. Good. That sounded
Um,
extremely negative.
yeah. No, I totally understand that. Um, because I felt like that a lot of my life too. How did you deal with it when you got the diagnosis? You said that it was a little bit relieving, but like, how did that
Yeah.
impact you emotionally when you got that call?
Um, that is a good one. So at the time, I had a boot on my right leg, and was still working full time and thinking about the whole word spontaneous, I guess. That's what still kind of sticks with me today, is that I'm definitely a type A person, and I like to plan and I like to control things and I like to prepare and know what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like my privacy too. One of the things that Dr. Rush recommended was please get a medical ID. And my fear was people would look at me differently. If I had a medical ID, my privacy, I felt like would be gone. I wanted to, my career is very important to me, and I pictured having to give that up. I catastrophized everything initially, I guess is the way it was. I felt very sorry for myself for a while. I would get very, very angry. It's the whole grief and loss process that I'm guessing everybody with this diagnosis or any major medical diagnosis experiences. That, I mean, I was really, really pissed at first, and every time my body did not do what I wanted it to do, I would just feel enraged, and so angry, which would freak Brian out because my husband, he would always be like, your blood pressure, just chill out, like, he's so spontaneously explode on me right now. But, I mean, of course, there's still days like that, even though it's been 4-ish years, something like that. I just turned 42 in December. And it is something I think about every day. I mean, there's not a day that goes by that I am free from the fears and worries of something happening. And I don't know if I'm more consciously aware of the little weird pains I have. But then that spikes my anxiety. I don't know, those thoughts just never really go away. Like right now, I'm relatively healthy, thank goodness. I just had a weird situation with my radial artery, but it's feeling really good right now. So
Yeah, I
don't know if I answered that question today.
I think you did. 'Cause
Okay.
I felt like that, and for me it was, you know, it was not as much rage, but I would get rage when somebody would tell me, "Oh, well, I mean, you were always, you could always get hit by a bus." Like that, like little
I've
statements
heard
like
that one.
that,
Yeah.
or the ones where
Yeah.
like somebody, like let's say at work, somebody did know, they're like in the public. I used to work in
Yeah.
government. And,
Mm.
this 80, he must have been 82 or 84. And he came in and said, it was the same week of my diagnosis. And he said, "Oh, well, when you're my
Mm.
age, you'll understand." And I just remember being so hurt by that because it was like, I am
Oh
not getting
gosh.
to your age. Like, there's no
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
But I just had to stifle it
Right.
because I was working. And so
Right. Yeah.
it hits you all the time. And I think for me, it got a little less and less as the time went on. Is that
Yeah.
how that happened for you?
Um, I think that I am more accepting of my body, and its limitations. I I mean, I used to love running. And if it wasn't for my Achilles problems in both legs, I would still do it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that was therapy for me and definitely part of my identity. So I had to have, a grieving process with that part of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so it goes back and forth, I guess. There's acceptance for this is a real diagnosis and this is why my body is the way that it is. But then sometimes that anger seeps in, and especially when, I mean, I'll just be honest, this sounds really petty too, but we live pretty close to a lake where I used to love to run, and I drive by there sometimes on the way to work, and when I see a runner, I have a flash of hatred for them and how awesome their bodies are working and how much I miss being able to partake in that. I mean, that was definitely part of my therapy, being out in nature and running and just having a place to think. That might have partially been where that abdominal aortic aneurysm and dissection happened because I thought I was so healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But when we met with the cardiologist, Brian and I both went back over some situations. And when I was 30, Brian's a little bit older than me, we went to Hawaii. My cousin lives on the island of Kauai.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you've ever heard, there's this amazing and scary trail. It's an 11-mile trail from one part of the island to a beach, and the only way that you can get there is either like by boat or by this trail.
Mm-hmm.
And so we backpacked in there, and part of it's like, looking back, it sounds really dumb because the ocean is really beautiful to me, but also very scary. And part of the trail, I think, is called Crawler's Ledge, where I did actually crawl most of the way because you are right on the edge of, the cliffs that go into the ocean.
Oh my gosh.
Like, very beautiful, but also terrifying. We were super lucky that it wasn't raining. It was beautiful, beautiful weather. I mean, it took us, a whole day to get there with all the ups and downs and rocks and strange paths and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But after making it 11 miles to the beach, I mean, it was worth it. But I think that my blood pressure was so high for probably an entire day that when we finally made it to the beach and we just sat down to kind of relax, I mean, it was within 5 minutes. I felt this major ripping feeling from, I mean, if I remember correctly, probably from my right knee all the way up to my groin.
Oh my.
And I thought, okay, I totally screwed up a tendon. Something snapped in my leg because I had so many problems with my left Achilles and knee surgeries, when I was in high school on my left leg. And I remember grabbing him even and was like waiting for it to stop, and it just traveled right up my leg. And I was like, okay, it stopped. That was weird. And then when I got up, I could walk a couple yards and my thigh would tighten up so much so that I felt like the circulation was being cut off.
Oh, wow.
So I was thinking in my head, catastrophizing again, but not thinking aortic dissection.
Right.
But thinking like, okay, I'm going to have another leg surgery, or I'm having like compartment syndrome, or something is cutting off the circulation. I don't know what's happening, but I'm screwed because there's no way I can go back 11 miles on that crazy trail.
Yeah.
But like a long very long story short, we found these lovely guys that had a kayak. And so we actually kayaked off the beach and went back around part of the island to where our car was parked. Um, and, that was my invincible, healthy 30s where I thought I could make it through anything. So we got back to the mainland. And for about 6 months, my leg would tighten up a little bit when I would walk. And then it went away, and I never went to the doctor because I was avoiding, like I did not want to have surgery on my legs and be in a cast and be
Yeah.
on crutches. And I'm pretty sure that's when the big stuff happened was, I mean, I guess there's no way to know for sure, really,
Yeah, you can
but
kind of guess based on the symptoms, but when it's in the past like
yeah,
that, it's hard to know for sure.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think that's the way that I've heard it described before. It really,
Hmm.
it's so bizarre to think of that too, but like a ripping sensation, like I
Yeah.
pulled a muscle or a tendon. Um,
So you've mentioned a few times, you know, your history of like ripping a tendon or,
yeah,
tearing
yeah,
you mentioned knee surgery, your Achilles and both legs, right?
yes.
So when you got this VEDS diagnosis, did that explain all of those things? Had all of those things been happening throughout your life?
Yeah, yeah, they did. My veins have always been really visible too. I work with kids now. I'm a mental health therapist, and mostly I work with kids, but I have been for like 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And a very common statement from my little honest friends is usually like, Miss Mariah, what are those blue things on your arms? And they're referring to my veins.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was never offended. I mean, kids are being curious, right? And
Yeah.
so I'd just be like, "Oh, buddy, those are my veins. You got veins too. We all have veins." And then they'd look at their arms and be like, "I don't have those veins," because they didn't see them at all. And I was just like, "Yeah, they're in there. They're in there somewhere." Um, and I mean, my hands have always been super veiny and my feet, and then always bruising and cutting myself. Like, I don't leave the house without band-aids. I've
Mm-hmm.
gotten weird looks from people. Like, if somebody suddenly needs a band-aid, I'll just whip one out of my pocket and they'll be like, uh, okay, sure. You just carry a first aid kit on you. Um, I mean, and then there's other stuff too, like headaches. Not so much gastro stuff, except, after surgery, that
Yeah.
um, problem, but
How did that
luckily,
feel growing up, not knowing what those
yeah,
things in your body were from?
yeah. Um, to a certain extent still now, but I had always hated my body and felt very, very different from everybody else, from my friends. I'm an only child. I don't have siblings. And I'm the only one in my family with the VEDS diagnosis. So um, I think of volleyball a lot. Like in middle school, I wanted to do what all my friends did. I wanted to play volleyball, and I did for a little bit. And Katie, it was so stinking painful bumping
I can't play volleyball
volleyball
either.
on the wrist. Like that is like such a sensitive spot with all
Yeah.
the blue veins popping out, and I would always have bruises, and I just wanted to do it, and nobody else had bruises, and I was kind of a freak. I just felt like my body wasn't doing what other people's bodies were doing, which was true. But I didn't like that's the worst thing ever, right? When you're younger or in middle school, that you don't want to be different from your friends, especially in like a weird medical way.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, because I mean, like
So,
when you're growing
yeah,
up, you've got friends, and like we all worry, even without something like this. I think everybody worries about being too different, or not fitting
Yes.
in. And then you have all this extra stuff.
Yes, for sure. That's exactly right. Yeah, and there wasn't, I mean, I had that other calf, I had two calf surgeries after my Achilles repair in high school. And even the doctors, I mean, they were clueless. They're like, yeah, your ACL ruptured. It was torn in half. But then that's when my Achilles tightened up, and they had no answers, absolutely none. Nothing to compare it to. I really felt a lot of the times they were like, this is a sad teenage girl that doesn't want to go to school, that wants attention. Um, I mean, obviously there was something wrong. I couldn't walk, and my muscle had tightened up so much that I was walking on my tippy toes at
Mm-hmm.
one point. But that to not even have validation from supposedly very educated medical professionals too.
Yeah.
That sucked. That really sucked.
So when you got the diagnosis, how did your family take it? You said you're the only one in your family?
Yes, only one in my family. So Brian, my husband, is all about research, and he had some time to do that on his own while I was recovering from my hysterectomy and bowel obstruction, and Achilles lengthening surgery. And so we could talk about it, and it made sense to me. So I was on board, and it was right sort of around Christmas time that I had that hysterectomy because I had time off work. And so my parents came to visit us. Um, and my mom is a nurse, or she just retired actually last year. Um, and my mom and dad are together. And Brian said he had a couple phone calls with them. Um, and they were, or at least my mom specifically, was just not accepting what Brian was telling her. I think it's sort of twofold. I think it has to do with her being a nurse. Um, and I think that she has a lot of guilt with my diagnosis coming so much later in life.
Mm-hmm.
That she is the type of person that, I mean, what a great mom. She is so loving and caring. And of course, I don't blame her for not knowing about this strange diagnosis when I was younger. But I think that was part of her denial too. And then, of course, me just being their only child, that was like a catastrophizing experience to think like all these things do make sense, but that means some very serious medical concerns that they weren't ready to talk about or accept.
Mm-hmm. So how do you talk to them about it now? Has it changed over the last 4 years?
Yes, I am very careful with what I share with my mom. She'll probably listen to this podcast later. So now I feel like I have to be careful. Um, I get headaches a lot, and I don't always tell her when I get headaches.
Mm-hmm.
I I like to run things by her because of her medical knowledge, but I definitely, when there's an ache or pain, I would rather send a message to my doctor or his nurse, um, rather than calling up my mom because it's too hard for her to be objective, you know? And I mean, her advice is always get yourself to the ER.
Yeah.
So, um, I can be real with her, but at the same time, it's, when I see her face or um, just gauge her response, I have to censor. what I tell her.
Mm-hmm.
And Brian too, to a certain extent. I mean, I'm not going to put myself in danger and hide, symptoms or problems, but um, I think that all of us probably censor what we tell our loved ones.
Yeah. I know I do, because I don't want to worry somebody unless it's absolutely necessary to worry them.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And I don't want, you probably feel this too, like I don't want to see the pain on somebody's face when I talk about like the lack of longevity
Right.
of my life that's possible. Like it's not
Yeah.
set in stone. But
Right.
I think about, okay, the median being 51, or, some
Yeah.
medians are reported as 48. And that's not an average. It
Yep.
means that 50% of people who have been studied have made it to that age. And I'm like, well,
Hmm.
realistically, like I like to think about everything realistically, and I
Hmm.
worry about that harming the people around me.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, Brian and I have had discussions about end of life care. Um, and I think he is, realistic in that way too, but it's not a fun conversation to have by any means. I mean, with anybody, but I don't want my death to be like a traumatic surprise for people too. I do want them to have the facts and um, I don't know. It's a hard balance, I guess.
Yeah. How has that impacted like your friendships or coworkers or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah, I did not tell anybody for a long time. It felt like such a heavy burden to place onto someone. Um, I have a number of friends that I feel very close to. Um, and I mean, there is that aspect of us, the majority of us at a certain time looking very healthy. And then, I mean, the people that care about you are believing you, of course. And so I guess maybe it's the medical trauma of not having doctors believe me, but I always have that in the back of my mind. Like, is she sure she knows what she's talking about when I tell somebody? But there have been a few friends that I have specifically chosen to tell, but it's taken a long time. Like, it definitely wasn't within that first year.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do have a medical ID now that I wear. Um, just because I think, I mean, I work full time, 40 hours a week. So the majority of my time, I would be with people that have no clue if I don't know, passed out or something weird happened. So,
Yeah.
um, I guess that gives maybe Brian and me a better peace of mind having that, even though it does feel like my privacy is lessened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but everyone has been very supportive, of course. And I just had some yearly scans a couple weeks ago, and my therapy team at work knew about it, and they were just beyond supportive. And as I mean, of course they would be, right? So I don't know what I expected that they would. I don't know. I guess denial is a big part of it for the people that care about you. So um, I guess that is part of it in the back of my mind too, that I'm afraid people will just be like, not to be hurtful, but they just want to live in that denial phase.
Mm-hmm. Like it isn't as serious as it really is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I think some people are more comfortable in that.
Definitely. Yeah.
And when I was first diagnosed, it was difficult to not want to like push it with those people.
Oh, yeah.
So it's like, do you not really know how serious this is? But
Yeah.
I really had to fight that. And I think it's like I almost think for some people it's a little bit of self-protection. Like they need to believe that.
Yes. I think you're right. Yeah, it can be very frustrating, but I mean, it sort of helps me remember that they are going through their whole process separately from what I'm feeling. Um, especially the ones closest to us are processing things on a whole different level, and
Yeah.
grief and loss of the relationship and what that means for their future without us. And um, I think whether they talk about it out loud or not, it's probably going through their heads.
Yeah, I'm sure. Is there anything that you would tell somebody who is just diagnosed with this that you think might help them cope with the diagnosis?
Ooh, definitely. I'm glad you asked. So I am a mental health therapist, and I do have my own therapist that I go see. And she is lovely, and I don't know that I would be able to deal with this. Not that I'm always healthy about it, but in the way that I do now without her. Um, just to have somebody who is neutral, who doesn't have a personal relationship with me to, I save up. I don't know if other people do this too, but I can compartmentalize things. Um, so if something happens during the week, I save it all for my therapist, Linda. Poor Linda. And she helps me process through things. I mean, a lot of it is um, the relationships and especially work. I struggled a lot with, talking to HR or my supervisors or whether or not to get scans every year.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, all the other fun stuff you can talk about in therapy, which is basically anything. But I don't know how anybody could get a diagnosis like this and not have a mental health professional to talk to. It is so beneficial, and I wish that everybody could do it. I wish that the genetic counselors and, the vascular surgeons would emphasize that when they're talking to patients, because this is heavy, heavy stuff. And you might be lucky enough to have a supportive family, which I feel like I do, but at the same time, there's some real disturbing stuff that maybe you don't want to share with the ones that care about you the most, right? Because that is disturbing to them. So please find a mental health professional, or you guys, I mean, any of you guys can message me and I'll try to, search the area. Or a lot of places, people say it's too expensive, but a lot of places have sliding fee scales if they don't take your insurance.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times you can work with an intern through a college. And so, I mean, if you have a good pastor or, someone like that you can talk to, it's nice to have that, someone you don't have a personal relationship with to talk to about it.
Because you can't really hurt their feelings or worry them
Absolutely.
when you say
Yeah.
something that you might have held back from somebody else.
Right. For sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's really good advice. I think I saw one for a few months after I was first diagnosed, and it was really helpful just having somebody to go and unload those things on that I was like holding in all week.
Yeah. Good. Yeah.
So,
Definitely.
well, is there anything else that you wanted to mention to the listeners about your story?
I don't think so. I just appreciate what you do, and I love our support groups that we have. I don't know what I'd do without you guys, and um, it's nice to know that we're not alone. I felt alone for a long time before I found the Facebook group and some other groups too. And um, we are not alone, and that's a good feeling.
Yeah. It's a really good feeling.
Yeah.
I felt the same way. I thought I was the only one that, like, I was the only one I knew, and I didn't know about the VEDS group on Facebook or anything. So it was just
Yeah.
kind of me and YouTube for a little while.
Oh gosh, yeah. And thank you for being so brave to do that. Goodness.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank
That
you.
takes some guts.
It was hard at the beginning. It was, I don't know if I've mentioned this on the podcast or not, but it was at the beginning, there were multiple times where I dealt with imposter syndrome and just like, why am I doing
Yeah.
this? This is stupid. I should just delete all of this. Nobody
Oh
wants to hear
gosh.
this. And then, like, somebody would reach out to me with their story randomly.
Yes,
And it would
cool.
always be like around that time when I was seriously thinking about deleting it. Like,
Yeah.
and
Oh,
somebody
thank
would reach
goodness you kept
out.
going.
Oh man, I'm so glad I did now.
Yes,
For a
for
while it
sure.
was really a struggle. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that from you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. Thank you.
And thank you everybody for listening. This is Staying Connected, and this is Katie, your host, talking to Mariah about her story with vascular Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Thank you so much for Mariah for sharing your story, and thank you everybody for listening. This is a monthly podcast on the last Sunday of every month, so stay tuned and talk to you soon.